Kalisasmera, good morning. The opening ceremony will begin with the welcoming address by the Vice Rector for Academic Affairs, International Relations and Extroversion, Professor Sofia Papaioannou.
Αξιότιμε ομότιμε καθηγητά, κύριε Γαβρόγλου, πρώην Υπουργέ Παιδείας, Έρευνας και Θρησκευμάτων. Dear Professor Halou, member of the French Academy of Inscriptions and Letters. Αξιότιμε καθηγητά, κύριε Σαριγιάννη, πρόεδρε του Εθνικού Ιδρύματος Ερευνών. Αξιότιμε καθηγητά, κύριε Μπαμπάλη, κοσμήτρωε της Σχολής Επιστημών της Αγωγής. Αξιότιμε καθηγητά, κύριε Σκορδούλη, πρόεδρε του Παιδαγωγικού Τμήματος Δημοτικής Εκπαίδευσης. Αγαπητοί συνάδελφε, κυρία Σιμακοπούλου, αντιπρόσωπε του Τμήματος Επιστημών Αγωγής στην προσχολική ηλικία. Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, αγαπητοί συμμετέχοντες, dear conference participants, κυρίες και κύριοι, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the National and Capodistrian University of Athens, I would like to welcome you to the second conference of the International Academy of the History of Science, which is organized in collaboration with the National Hellenic Research Foundation, with the support of the National and Capodistrian University of Athens School of Education. I'm delighted to open this conference, which is also the first academic conference of the new academic year. The topic of the conference is science and human value, and more precisely, scientific practices and human values, a historical approach. Should scientists be concerned with the ethical issues and the social impact of their work? Should they accept responsibility for the human and environmental consequences of scientific research? Those questions did not arise in the distant past because there hardly were such consequences. In those days, science had no role in the day-to-day life of people, or, with a few exceptions, and I recall Pliny the Elder or Leonardo da Vinci or Archimedes, in the security of states. Science was largely the pursuit of gentlemen of leisure. They would collect plants or fossils. They would gaze at the sky and note unusual events. The impulse for those pursuits was sheer curiosity, the same that drives scientists today, with no proclaimed practical aims. In the course of time, science began to take up a full-time profession. Learned societies and academies of science were established with highly exclusive memberships, and this widened even further the detachment of scientists from society. When the Royal Society, allow me to digress, which is now the National Academy of Science in the UK, was formed 350 years ago, one of its founders, the famous physicist Robert Hooke, stipulated that the society should not meddle, quote, in divinity, metaphysics, morals, politics, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, unquote. The detachment of scientists from general human affairs led them to build an ivory tower in which they sheltered, pretending that their work had nothing to do with the human welfare. Arising from this exclusivity, scientists developed certain precepts about science to justify the separation from reality. These precepts, including catchphrases like science for its own sake, scientific inquiry can know no limits, science is rational and objective, science has nothing to do with politics, are not relevant today. The tremendous advances in pure science, particularly in physics in the first half of the 20th century and in biology in the second half of the 20th century, have completely changed today the relations between science and society. Science has become a dominant element in our lives. It has brought great improvements in the quality of life, but also grave perils. Pollution of the environment, global warming, squandering of vital resources, increase in transmittable diseases, and above all, a threat to the very existence of the human species through the development of weapons of mass destruction. An important outcome of the change of emphasis in scientific research is the narrowing of the gap between pure and applied science. In many areas, this distinction has become very difficult to discern. What is pure research today may find an application tomorrow and become incorporated into the daily life of the citizen next week, or even earlier if it has military value. Scientists can no longer claim that their work has nothing to do with the welfare of the individual or with state politics. This is an immoral attitude, and in my opinion, it is unacceptable. It issues personal responsibility for the likely consequences of one's actions. The ethical and social responsibility of the science in his or her research practice and application is a burning issue today. This being said, I wish you a successful conference with stimulating discussions. The topic of this conference is of the utmost importance today, for the basic human value is life itself. The most important of human rights is the right to live. It is the duty of scientists to see to it that through their work, life will not be put into peril, but will be made safe with its quality enhanced. Thank you very much, and have a great conference.
Good morning. My name is Kostas Stambakis. I'm a senior researcher in the National acting as the in this capacity, I would like to invite Associate Professor Gianna Katsiaboura to convey the greetings of Thomas Babalis, Dean of the School of
I'm Gianna Katsiaboura, not Thomas Babalis. Dear distinguished guest, it is a great honor to welcome you on behalf of the School of Education to the National and Capodistrian University of Athens. As you probably know, the University of Athens was one of the first in the world to establish a chair for the history of science in the 1920s with Professor Michael Stefanidis, whose involvement with the International Academy of Science was of great significance in the establishment of the field in Greece. The School of Education of the University of Athens has a long tradition in teaching history of science and technology, both in undergraduate and postgraduate level, as a part for the professional development of both primary and secondary science teachers. Also, we support our staff in participating in a relevant research project and in organizing international conferences such as this one. With this opportunity, I would like to thank Professor Fotinia Simakopoulou and Assistant Professor Gianna Katsiamboura, members of the organizing committee, on behalf of our School of Education, that helped in the successful organization of this conference. With all these thoughts in mind, I welcome you in the university, and I wish every success for the works of this conference and a very pleasant stay in the historic city of Athens. Thank you.
I'd like now to invite Kostas Kordoulis, President of the Department of Primary Education at the National Eastern University.
Good morning, dear distinguished guests, dear fellow members of the Academy. It is a great honor for me to welcome you in the University of Athens and also in this conference, which is of great importance for the existence and the history of the Academy. As the head of the Department of Pedagogy and Primary Education, we support this conference, and we support this conference tangibly and intangibly. The Department of Primary Education, long ago, has incorporated history of science in its syllabi and runs courses both in a postgraduate and undergraduate level, since we firmly believe that history of science contributes a lot in the professional development of teachers. This university is the oldest university in Greece and in the Southeast Mediterranean. It is one of the universities that ranks highly in the world. This university is one of the few universities that in the world that have a department on history and philosophy of science. And we are also honored as a country to have a Minister of Education, a historian of science, Professor Gavroglou. This conference is an important conference. It is a conference for science and human values. In this age of climate crisis, in this age of war, science has to be the champion of defending social and human values. With these words in mind, I welcome you again in this conference, and I wish every success in this conference and also in your stay in Athens. Thank you.
I would like now to invite Professor Fotinia Simakopoulou to convey the greetings of Vasilis Tsafos, President of the Department of Early Childhood Education. The official languages of the conference are both English and French, and it is my understanding that this will be in French.
Bonjour. Madame Papaioannou, Madame la vice-recteur, Monsieur le Président Sariannis, Monsieur le Président de l'Académie Sergei Demidov, Monsieur Gavroglou, ex-ministre de l'Éducation et de la Recherche, chers collègues, chers étudiants et chers amis, c'est avec beaucoup de plaisir que nous vous adressons au nom de tous les collègues du département de l'éducation préscolaire de l'Université d'Athènes, à une conférence très importante, à notre avis, et surtout à cette période. L'importance d'organiser une conférence intitulée « Sciences et valeurs humaines » est due à deux facteurs cruciaux. Avant tout, maintenant, en tant que spécialistes en sciences humaines, nous devons penser au rôle que le domaine scientifique de chacun et de chacune joue au développement dans les divers cadres culturels. Cependant, réfléchissons également au sens que nous donnons au terme humanisme humaniste dans le contexte académique et aux significations alternatives qui peuvent exister. Comment les sciences peuvent-elles agir comme un élément unificateur dans la perspective d'inverser la déconstruction humaniste laquelle nous vivons et dans une certaine mesure sous notre propre responsabilité? Dans quelle mesure d'émergence de divers domaines interdisciplinaires sur la base de notre vision multiprismatique du monde peut-elle affecter le cours non seulement de la pensée scientifique, mais aussi de la société et même de nos vies? Quelles nouvelles perspectives peuvent émerger d'une autre vision? Cependant, étant donné que le domaine scientifique ne se développe pas dans les vides culturels, il est nécessaire, en tant qu'universitaires et chercheurs, de réfléchir à la manière dont nous affrontons la politique mondiale. Nous devons donc nous interroger sur les réponses scientifiques que nous apportons à la restauration du politique conservatrice et à la domination du discours néolibéral, ce qui signifie un retour aux pratiques politiques conservatrices. Autrement dit, comment aborder l'instrumentalisation des connaissances scientifiques et l'importance croissante accordée au management, à la culture de la performance et de l'excellence? Et enfin, comment donner aujourd'hui un sens au développement scientifique, au développement et au droit inaliénable et désormais institutionnellement garanti à la libre action et à l'intervention individuelle et collective, non seulement pour chaque scientifique, mais aussi pour chaque être humain? À mon avis, c'est les questions très importantes qui, comme le montre le programme de la conférence, seront discutées, ne peuvent que générer des réflexions fructueuses. Réflexions dont nous avons peut-être plus que jamais besoin pour contrebalancer les conditions particulièrement dystopiques que nous vivons aujourd'hui pour de nombreuses raisons. Merci.
I'd like to invite Demosthenis Aregiannis, Director and Chairman of the Board of the National Hellenic Research Foundation, to open the conference.
Dear distinguished guests, Right Honorable Minister Gavroglou, and allow me on a very personal moment to say my teacher, Professor Gavroglou from the Technical University of Athens, he is the one who has coined a lot of what I think in terms of science and the evolution of science. So again, many thanks for this. It is an honor to actually open this conference. It's a very timely event. It could not be more timely than now. As you said, we do live through very dire conditions on the world scale, locally in Greece, with the climate crisis hitting us very strongly, and obviously societal responses being inadequate. Let's be honest about that. So again, science has a key role to play in this interplay, and we do have additional dimensions in terms of how to deal with new aspects of science, for instance, AI, artificial intelligence. how does AI affect the link between science and human value? That's a key question. One of my favorite theatrical playwriters, Bertolt Brecht, put to the lips of Galileo Galilei in his play on the life of Galileo words on what science is about. He said, "The main objective of science is not to open the door to infinite wisdom, but to roll back the boundaries of infinite error." I think that's a very, very insightful way of putting it. Science obviously is capable of human valuation for its consequences, as you said, its process, its actions. Thus, ethics cannot be separated from scientific analysis, unlike what neo-positivists and empiricism sustained. In fact, science and human values have long been intertwined, shaping each other in a dynamic relationship. Science, as a systemic and systematic pursuit of knowledge, has contributed to our understanding of the world, while human values have guided how we use this knowledge for the betterment of society. In recent decades, the advent of artificial intelligence has introduced new dimensions to this relationship, and that we see getting accelerated in the last few years, both enhancing the potential of science and raising at the same time ethical and philosophical questions about the values that underpin its application. I will try very shortly, if you allow me 2 minutes, to explore this connection, because I think it's an interesting dimension that we need to consider in the realm of this conference. So again, science has historically been driven by human values with curiosity, exploration, a desire for understanding at its core. It has provided us with insights into the natural world, enabling advancement in technology. I'm an engineer, so it's very close to my heart, medicine, and countless other fields. However, science does not exist in a vacuum. It operates within a framework of human values, ethics, and societal norms. Human values such as compassion, empathy, justice, and the desire for a better future guide how we harness scientific knowledge. For example, medical science seeks to improve human health, aligning with the value of compassion for alleviating suffering. Scientific discoveries have also helped us address societal challenges by promoting values like equality, equity, justice through evidence-based policymaking. And we've seen, for instance, in the US in the last few years, how evidence-based policymaking can be a threat to politicians who do not want to abide by these values. Now, AI, artificial intelligence, with its capacity for data analysis, pattern recognition, and decision-making support, has revolutionized the scientific landscape. It has enhanced our ability to collect, process, and interpret vast amounts of data, accelerating research in fields like genomics, climate science, drug discovery. AI-driven technologies have the potential to address some of humanity's most pressing challenges, from climate change to disease eradication. However, the integration of AI into science also poses ethical dilemmas and challenges to human values. Bias and fairness, as to start with. AI systems can inherit biases present in their training data, potentially perpetuating societal inequalities. Addressing these biases requires a commitment to values such as fairness and justice. Privacy. The collection and use of personal data by AI systems raise concerns about privacy, and balancing the benefits of data-driven research with individual rights is a value-based challenge. I know very much about it because my personal research is on environment and health, and for this we need personalized data, and we do run exactly against this problem. How do you balance this ethical dilemma? Transparency and accountability. Ensuring transparency in AI decision-making processes is essential for accountability and trust, and this relates to values like honesty, responsibility. Autonomy versus control. AI systems can make autonomous decisions, challenging human values regarding control and accountability. Striking a balance between human oversight and AI autonomy is a value-driven issue. Job displacement. The rise of AI in various industries raises questions about the value of work and employment. Society must grapple with the potential economic and social implications of automation in this regard. And finally, ethical decision-making. AI can be programmed to make ethical decisions, but determining whose values should guide these decisions is obviously a complex issue, to say the least. Now, science and human values have always been, as I said, intertwined, influencing each other in the pursuit of knowledge and the betterment of society. Artificial intelligence, with its transformative potential, has introduced both opportunities and challenges to this relationship. It has enhanced scientific capabilities while forcing us to configure and confront ethical and philosophical questions about the values that govern its use. To navigate this evolving landscape, it is crucial to remain committed to human values such as fairness, justice, transparency, accountability. The responsible development and use of AI, and in this sense also all other transformative technologies that we're coming up with, must align with these values to ensure that science continues to serve humanity's best interests. As we forge ahead into an AI, or if you want, technology-driven future, the enduring partnership between science and human values will remain at the heart of our ethical and societal decisions. And I'd just like to close saying that what you are discussing today and in the next few days, this week in Athens, actually, is there a better place to have this discussion in the world other than Athens, in this particular place, the University of Athens and the National Research Foundation? We need to consider that these questions that you are discussing are really at the heart of where we're going to go as a society, global society, not just in Greece or regionally. And honestly, I do think that we should have many, many more politicians other than Professor Gavroglou in this room and in the parallel sessions, because they need to learn from these discussions. They need to learn to make better decisions, more thoughtful decisions, more societally engaged decisions. Thank you so much. I wish you all success.
Now to call Kostas Gavroglou, former Minister of Education and Professor Emeritus of the University of Athens, introductory remarks.
Hello, Madam Vice Chancellor, Professor Sarianis, the President of our foremost research institution, the President of the Academia, I welcome you all. I thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to exchange some thoughts as one of you, as emeritus from the Department of History and Philosophy of Science. Such meetings as the one we are starting today provide a good opportunity to discuss a number of issues which are somewhat outside the strict limits of our research agendas. I would thus like to share some thoughts, in fact, some gloomy thoughts about the future of our discipline, and then about the future of the humanities. I very much hope to be able to continue these discussions throughout the conference. Let me start from the love-hate relationship we historians of science have had with the scientists. For many decades, almost all scholarship produced in the history of science was intended for an audience of scientists. Until about the mid of the 20th century, many scientists showed an interest in and appreciated such historical work, which was done mostly by scholars with technical scientific background. Before the early 50s, it was almost inconceivable that a non-scientist could do history of science. As scholarship was becoming more and more sophisticated, history of science met with the benign neglect of the scientists. A significant part of the community of historians of science time and again raised questions like, who are we writing for? Who listens to us? Who reads what we write? And what effect are our findings have on the education of the scientists? The answers to these questions were depressingly clear, and the situation became even more depressing when many of us in our discussion with scientists came to realize that many scientists were confusing our work with philosophy of science or even with popularization of past scientific achievements. As time passed, our community's attempts to talk to scientists and engage them in our discussions effectively came to a dead end. Of course, the indifference of the scientists, or rather the diminishing appeal of history of science to scientists, has not hindered the development of our field. Many reasons brought about this alienation. The changing aims of general education in high schools, the continuously increasing emphasis on the practical, the skills-oriented aims of the curriculum, the very way soft and hard sciences are labeled, and the implied antagonism concerning their educational and social statuses, the dominance of the technocratic approach to the solution of many social problems, the powerful grip of positivism on the ways scientists and engineers perceive the development of their fields, the progressive development of a distinctive language and jargon in history of science, the fact that scholarship in history of science moved away from the internalist approaches. All these factors contributed to the diminishing involvement of scientists with history of science. However, it would be very unjust not to acknowledge the help that has been given by many scientists in our own pursuits, such as the establishment of programs, institutes, departments, and research centers. There are also many scientists who work on issues related to the ways history and philosophy of science can be used for improving the teaching of the sciences. Nevertheless, the chasm between the pursuits of historians of science and those of scientists was further widened when social constructivism articulated a series of insightful yet scathing critiques against every single idea that history of science traditionally stood for. Methodologies in history of science that had been forged through decades of discussions, and theoretical categories such as objectivity and causality, the truthfulness or falsity of knowledge claims, and the roles of scientists in their institutions all came under the incisive scrutiny of some very able scholars. Historians of science progressively adopted views that were orthogonal to what scientists value most. Scientists almost axiomatically believe that between many explanatory alternatives, one should choose the simplest, whereas historians of science avoid simple explanations and try to understand complexity. Scientists have a rather strong attachment to causality, while historians of science prefer to speak of correlations. Scientists have a firm belief that our true understanding of nature is the result of an unfolding process where one truth leads to another. Historians of science try to understand the role of contingencies. They try to understand why things that could have developed differently did not do so. Scientists have no place for social factors as parameters that may have played a role in the development of their fields. Historians of science bring in all kinds of social and political parameters in order to make sense of the developments in the sciences. What matters finally to scientists are the history of correct theories, correct ideas. But wrong theories, as historians of science know, are as important as the correct ones. Here then are two different cultures, and in fact one is threatening the other. As our discipline evolved, fewer and fewer scientists could understand the changes in history of science, so the chasm widened. Presently, however, the threat to our discipline and the humanities in general does not come from the scientists. Social sciences and the humanities face one of the most intriguing challenges to date from the forceful instrumentalization by many funding bodies. One such body is the European Union's Horizon program, which has been providing over 100 billion euros in funding research in many areas. I shall be talking exclusively about the Horizon program and not, of course, about ERC. Just like all the other disciplines, in the previous European Union funding schemes, the humanities and the social sciences had their own niche and formed an independent category for funding. Under Horizon, this independent status gave way to a cross-cutting integration with other fields of research. The overall mentality in these programs is to instrumentalize social sciences and the humanities. That means to make these disciplines subservient to the needs of, for example, health, biology, informatics, energy, and national security. The European Union policy states that embedding social sciences and humanities research across health, security, climate change, as I said, is essential, in their own words, to maximize the returns to society from investment in science and technology. What is being outlined in these policy papers for the social sciences and humanities is indicative of the newly emerging legitimizing context for these disciplines. In the huge fundings of the Horizon programs, the social sciences and humanities are considered relevant only to the extent that they serve the needs and aims of other areas of research. For many years, the European Union funding programs, the social sciences and humanities comprised a separate category and were funded through a separate budget. This is no longer the case. Hence, one can apply for, say, a topic related to the sociology of health with an application that has to do with health itself, but not directly to the area of social sciences and the humanities. And why is this so? The European Union has an absolutely clear answer, and it is spelled out in the various documents. Embedding social sciences and humanities research in other areas of research is essential to maximize the returns to society from investment in science and technology. The key word here is to maximize the returns, a well-known expression for assessing the performance of businesses and banks. Thus, the social sciences and the humanities become catalysts for making the most out of the investments in science and technology. Let us consider the last 10 years. During these years, there have been stupendous transformations, and a number of new phenomena have codified what we hold to be our everydayness. But instead of witnessing a renewed interest from various institutions in the social sciences and humanities and a reaffirmation of the collective social and political faith in the possibilities of social sciences and humanities to provide an understanding and propose ways of managing these phenomena, there is an increasing evidence for the exact opposite. In these 10 years, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, and Bill Gates, and the companies they founded became household names. Cryptocurrency turned into some kind of a modern age philosopher's stone. Tech companies acquired inconceivable global power over the citizens. Algorithms became an integral part of our parlance. Millions have switched from Facebook to Instagram and from Instagram to TikTok. Donald Trump's presidency caused many scholars to talk about the USA sliding fast into a state which lacks democratic institutions. The European political scene has seen the rise and stabilization of extreme right parties, which are no longer marginal groups but players in government affairs. The expectations for a rosy future cultivated by the architects of Brexit is now in shambles. Incredibly enough, there is a war being raged in the very heart of Europe. The very status of the European Union faces an uncertain future. The COP27 climate conference, which took place in November 2022 in Egypt, apart from the heads of states and climate experts, hosted over 600 lobbyists of the fossil fuel companies. And of course, it failed to decide how to limit global temperature increases. And unfortunately, COVID, one way or the other, has been with us since 2020 and left its mark on almost every social activity in extremely complicated ways. In such a world, one would have expected a rather dramatic increase in the funding for social sciences and humanities research. Unfortunately, the tendency has been to decrease such funding. I'm sure there are some colleagues, very well-meaning colleagues, who may be thinking that such a reorientation of the social sciences and the humanities makes them more relevant to everyday problems. They may even think that the association with mainstream societal issues gives to our pursuits a much-needed legitimation. I am afraid that such a reorientation will promote a new set of criteria for assessing the success of these disciplines. And thus, if social sciences and the humanities provide fewer and fewer returns to society and less success in guaranteeing national security, then it will be a short step for those who have pushed such an agenda to start arguing that these disciplines are no longer serving their designated purpose. This may sound like an exaggerated claim, but it should serve as a reminder that what it is at stake is not the demise of the humanities and the social sciences, but their radical transformation, and with this transformation, the transformation of the criteria for assessing these disciplines. To ignore the practical applications of the social sciences and humanities, to sweep aside the utilitarian uses of these disciplines and argue exclusively for their epistemological and disciplinary independence is, of course, a dead end. It is even wrong. But it is one thing to acknowledge the utilitarian potential as one of the many possibilities furnished by these disciplines, and it is a different thing altogether to use these characteristics as criteria for funding or as criteria for their justification for their place in the universities and research institutes. This gloomy outlook may perhaps be somewhat counterbalanced by the unforeseen developments related to the digital conditions, to digitality. Concepts and practices related to locality, identity, performativity, teaching, knowledge production, and the publication of research outcomes will be dramatically transformed in the years to come. The digital condition already forces us to adopt new ethical modes, restructures our working time, imposes new styles of reading and teaching with nothing in common with classroom culture, and opens up possibilities for the wide availability of research results. And within this framework, the socio-professional identities of scholars will radically change. But above all, it will be the symbiosis of the digital conditions with democracy, the mutual dependencies and the dynamics that will be created that will be ultimately decisive for the future of the social sciences and the humanities. Developments in these fields have historically been closely tied with re-articulations of democracy in many and complicated ways. And since almost all academic pursuits are heavily influenced by the ideologically and politically hegemonic values at any period of their development, future re-articulations of democracy should leave our prospects wide open. Thank you.
I'd like now to invite Sergei Demidov, President of the International Academy of the History of Science, give his welcome address.
Chers collègues, mesdames et messieurs, aujourd'hui nous sommes réunis ici à la veille d'un événement important pour tous les historiens des sciences, de célébrer le 100e anniversaire de la création de notre Académie. L'Académie internationale d'histoire des sciences est née le 17 août 1928, pendant le Congrès international des sciences historiques à Oslo. Et un an après a eu lieu le premier Congrès international d'histoire des sciences à Paris, au mois de mai 1929. Merci. 100 ans, c'est beaucoup ou peu? La réponse dépend de quel côté vous regardez. Même du point de vue d'une échelle purement humaine, la réponse est assez ambiguë. Quand j'étais encore écolier et on célébrait le centenaire de figures marquant du passé, par exemple le jubilé du célèbre mathématicien et mécanicien Lyapunov en 1957, alors j'ai imaginé un personnage du passé lointain de la Russie pré-révolutionnaire. Et tout ce qui passait avant la révolution russe de 1917, pour moi, alors élève de la 8e année d'un lycée à Moscou, semblait être une histoire ancienne qui laisse ses traces dans la littérature, mais sans aucun rapport avec moi, avec ma vie actuelle de l'époque. Lorsque je suis entré à un âge différent et j'ai commencé à participer aux célébrations du 100e anniversaire de personnes dont j'ai eu le privilège de les connaître personnellement, comme par exemple le grand mathématicien Andrei Nikolaevich Kolmogorov, alors l'intervalle de 100 ans a perdu le charme de l'abîme mystique. C'était hier, et je m'en souviens très bien, La réponse à une telle question deviendra encore plus ambiguë lorsqu'il ne s'agira plus de la vie d'une personne, mais d'une institution entière. L'Académie internationale d'histoire des sciences, qui a commencé son histoire après la fin des événements tragiques de la Grande Guerre, a survécu de la Seconde Guerre mondiale et par la volonté du destin semble inévitablement flotter dans la réalité d'une troisième. Nous sommes paresseux et moins intéressés. Ce sont les mots d'un grand poète russe, Alexandre Pouchkine, pour caractériser les intellectuels de la société russe vers 1836 dans son œuvre Voyage à Erzurum. Et il me semble qu'ils sont tout à fait applicables à la communauté des historiens des sciences du XXe siècle. Une communauté qui n'a pas encore pris en charge de créer un ouvrage approfondi sur l'histoire de sa propre académie, une institution chargée pendant les nombreuses années d'organiser les activités de la communauté, organisation du congrès internationaux, des revues, des livres, etc. Fort heureusement, une équipe de temps compétents travaille actuellement afin de combler cette lacune. Et nous espérons vivement que ce travail sera achevé d'une manière adéquate d'ici jusqu'à son anniversaire. Malgré toutes les difficultés survenues dans la vie de la communauté des historiens des sciences au tournant complexe de l'histoire du XXe siècle, l'Académie a joué et constitue un rôle important dans le développement de notre discipline, dans l'organisation de la vie scientifique internationale, dans la coordination des attitudes et des activités spécifiques des institutions scientifiques. Parmi les manifestations réussites concernant ces activités, nous devons signaler le développement de son influence sur les régions qu'auparavant restaient à la périphérie de ses intérêts. Dans ce sens, l'entrée récente des collègues de la Grande Chine au projet académique fut particulièrement fructueuse. L'action de se diriger vers l'Est, vers la science de l'Inde et de la Chine, vers le monde arabe et enfin vers la science de l'Afrique et de l'Amérique latine, devrait devenir un des principaux axes de sa politique. Un tel tournant deviendra d'autant plus naturel en se rappelant la continuité et la matérialisation des intentions de nos grands professeurs qui illuminent l'honneur et la fierté de notre Académie, tels que Dickstein, Vassiliev, Kadjeri, Smith, Heath, Bortolotti, Tropke, Brunswick, Willeitner, Mikami, Miele, Vetter, Sarton, Datta, Vogel, Struve, Coiré, Sergesco, Neugebauer, Hoffmann, Needham, Zuboff, Van der Waarden, Juszkiewicz, Truesdell, Whiteside. L'Académie, confrontée à de grandes tâches qui continuent des réalités du monde véritablement menaçant d'aujourd'hui, est prête à s'engouffrer dans l'abîme d'une nouvelle guerre mondiale, devient de plus en plus difficile à exécuter. Nous ne pouvons qu'espérer le meilleur et essayer de faire tout ce qui est en notre pouvoir pour que le pire des scénarios éventuels ne se réalisera pas. Nous souhaitons beaucoup de succès à notre conférence et nous essayerons de faire tout ce qui est à notre pouvoir afin qu'on puisse célébrer le 5e anniversaire de notre Académie en paix et en parfaite harmonie. Merci.
Plenary lecture of Robert Allais will be read by Professor Jan van der Smissen, University of Ghent. Unfortunately, our colleague could not be here. Will be read.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm very happy to be here in Athens and finally, after so many years, see you back, and hopefully we will have a very fruitful meeting in the next days. At the beginning of this Congress, I would first like to pay tribute to Professor Robert Allais, Honorary Permanent Secretary, who for 2 years, despite illness, managed the Academy and who gave us this text. Currently hospitalized, he cannot be with us and has asked me to send you his best wishes for the success of our work. As the theme of its second Congress, the Academy chose History of Sciences and Human Values. By this choice, she wants, first of all, to be part of the research orientations of her host, the Hellenic Research Foundation, where the team of Professor Nikolaidis, our new permanent secretary, is completing the major project SO, Science and Orthodoxy in the World, which confronts science and revelation, both from an epistemological and ethical angle, within one of the great spiritual traditions of the world. The Academy also wants to come out of its ivory tower and engage in the contemporary world shaped by science and technology, since the old Aristotelian episteme techne distinction has been erased. This is how science is fraught with promises and threats for nature, society, and the human being as a whole. It also gives rise to a powerful anti-scientific movement and the development of parallel knowledge. This is where history can shed light on decision-making processes, since, as Nobel Prize winner Ilya Prigogine said, science is made by man, for man. By analyzing the relationship between science and dominant values in a given society, and by identifying their social-political substrate, one can fuel critical reflection. To initiate this journey, the date of this Congress is particularly significant. 110 years ago, in 1913, a Belgian, George Sarton, founded a journal that would become a reference, ISIS. In the editorial, he stated, and I quote, "History of science is the history of humankind," unquote. 10 years later, in 1923, Lynn Thorndike published the first 2 volumes of his monumental History of Magic and Experimental Science, which was only finished in 1958. He gave the word to the losers, the astrologers, the alchemists, the magicians, introducing other rationalities and other values. After a century, these two stories of science and pseudoscience still form a diptych. This is why this lecture will consist of two parts. The first, historiographical, will explain how historians of science have progressively taken into account ethical and social questions. The second will outline the origins of the major contemporary questions in science and technology with regard to values, science and morality, science and society, science and nature, science and the dignity of the human being. First, something about the historiography of science and human values. George Sarton disseminated his thoughts in the editorials of the journal ISIS and in the monumental work Introduction to the History of Science, which he had to stop in the 15th century, because his ambitious synchronisms between the various cultural areas proved artificial. For Sarton, if the history of science is the history of humanity, it is because it is the only cumulative process. We know more than our predecessors, and the only universal process, since the equations are the same everywhere. Science therefore generates its own values, and the history of science is the basis of a new humanism. It was the optimism of the League of Nations and the International Council for Intellectual Cooperation where Einstein and Marie Curie distinguished themselves. At the same time, the French surrealist poet André Breton exclaimed, and I quote, "Put the physicists in prison, close the laboratories," unquote. Auschwitz and Hiroshima in a way proved him right, since science could become perverse and go crazy. In 1953, in his presidential speech at the 7th International Congress of the History of Science in Jerusalem, Sarton made his mea culpa by appealing to all men of goodwill by affirming, and I quote, "There is no truth without charity and charity without knowledge," unquote. The atomic bomb gave rise to what Jean-Marie Lévy-Leblond calls a self-criticism of science, bearing not on the approach itself, but on its enslavement to power and capital. The works of Robert Merton, Mary Hesse, Bruno Latour, Helga Novotny, and many others introduced the science-society dimension and a new way of writing the history of science as a social product, inspired by Friedrich Engels' Anti-Düring. Their works introduced a radical relativism into the history of science, especially among post-Kuhnian constructivists, at the risk of jeopardizing the very specificity of the scientific project. As Isabel Stengers writes, and I quote, "Science is the type of activity which, in given circumstances, is practiced by people who call themselves scientists," unquote. The recent history of sciences and knowledge directed by Dominique Pestre fits into this perspective. However daring it may be, this approach has enabled the integration of new knowledge and new values from the non-European world into the territories of the history of science. So-called classical science based on the bipole ratio experientia, calculation and experience, was an instrument of domination, and its methodological criteria were considered as the only criteria for evaluating dominated cultural areas. For the philosophers of the Enlightenment, their systems of knowledge and value were on the same level as the Greeks of Homer's time, in the infancy of humanity. This is the reason why traditional systems of knowledge and even folk medicine in Europe were never treated seriously. In 1999, at a World Conference of Science in Budapest, the international union, whose president was the late Professor Subarayapa, and of which I, Robert Halleux, was the Secretary General, organized a session on science and other systems of knowledge and proposed a motion in favor of the study and promotion of traditional knowledge. Supported largely by the countries of the South, it was rejected by the Anglo-Saxons who dominated the ICSU. For its part, Thorndike's historiographical approach, even if it studied knowledge today considered false, brought to light other questions: man's relationship with the divine, with the supernatural, with the order of nature. Astrology poses the problem of freedom, alchemy that of wealth and power, magic that of the licit and the illicit in the use of the forces it is supposed to release. This approach penetrated historiography thanks to the great controversy of the 1960s on Hermeticism and in the scientific revolution, namely the horoscopes of Kepler, the initiatory dreams of Descartes, the alchemy of Newton. It appeared that Hermeticism, far from being a break on the new science, had been an incentive. Thus, a new history of knowledge, freed from the scientific shackles, is able to begin the vast project of a comparative and contrasting history of science and values. The origins of the questions. To mark out the research, we will take 4 constant references in history: the moral rule, society, nature, the dignity of man. Science and its standards. A long tradition calls into question the scientific approach itself, either because it is forbidden by the divine, or because it is uncertain, or because it compromises the salvation of the soul, or because it harms virtue. Some research impinges on the power of God, such as knowing the future through astrology. We remember the verse of Horace, tu ne caeseris. Important here is the semantics of the word curiositas, pejorative in St. Augustine, vana curiositas, that is to say, to seek what does not concern you, which becomes positive in the 17th century. That the signs are uncertain, all the skeptics have spoken about, from Sextus Empiricus to Cornelius Agrippa, with his 1530 treatise on the uncertainty and vanity of all the arts and all the sciences, which opposes, somewhat artificially, to sciences the certainty of magic and revelation. Similarly, at the end of the 20th century, brilliant intellectuals, overwhelmed by the development of science, attacked it fiercely and took refuge in the paranormal, like Archer Koestler in his last works. On the other hand, the Christian ascetic authors repeat since the imitation of Jesus Christ that knowledge is useless to salvation, since on the day of judgment you will be asked not what you have read, but what you have done. But an ancient tradition has remained alive until today. The progress of science and technology implies the disruption of morals. In the 1st century before Christ, Posidonius of Apamea outlines a theory of double contrasting progress that we find in Lucretius, Pliny the Elder, and Seneca. The more science and technology progress, the more the corruption of morals advances. This is, in fact, the theme that Jean-Jacques Rousseau develops in his Discours sur les sciences et les arts, presented to the Academy of Dijon in 1749. I quote, "Our souls have become corrupted as our sciences and our arts are advanced towards perfection, unquote. A little later, the poet William Blake claimed that Newton, Locke, and Bacon were, and I quote, the infernal trinity that had satanic influence on humanity, unquote. Science and social values. The second tradition sees science and its applications as a threat to social balance. Aristotle wrote, and I quote, if the shuttles weaved by themselves, and if the plectrums played a zither by themselves, the master builders would not need laborers, nor the masters their slaves, unquote. This text does not mean, as has often been said, that the Greeks did not have machines because they had slaves, but it measures, like an adinaton, the social consequences of mechanization. Another case. A craftsman came to present a recipe for flexible glass to the Emperor Tiberius. The Emperor asked him if he had communicated this secret to others. The craftsman replied no. The Emperor had him executed for fear that his new material would lower the price of precious metals. From 1811 to 1816, when the Industrial Revolution was flourishing in England, groups of workers would scour the countryside to destroy spinning and weaving machines they saw as a threat to their jobs. They were called Luddites, after their leader Neil Ludd, a poor Lancashire labourer who was, according to bourgeois historians, mentally ill. This large-scale movement went beyond contesting a particular technology to embrace the global image of the social system. The Luddite revolt was crushed in blood, but the Luddite attitudes were repeated at each of the great mutations that classical historiography calls industrial revolutions, and that Bertrand Gilles calls changes in the technical system. Napoleon encouraged neither Cugnot's steam tractor nor Fulton's steamship and submarine. According to Françoise Thom, recent biographer of Lavrenti Beria, Stalin held back investment in computer technologies, preferring heavy industry which guaranteed more jobs, which caused Soviet computing to lag behind. We could continue the story with the beginning of cybernetics in the 1950s and the turmoil caused by Norbert Wiener's book, Cybernetics and Society, in 1952. In a recent book, Christophe Bonneuil has analyzed the debates in the intellectual world, from Lanza del Vasto's radical break with science to the criticism of its capitalist exploitation by Maritain, Henri Lefebvre, and the Christian intellectuals of the journal Esprit. Science and nature. All ecologists should reread Pliny the Elder's Historia Naturalis, whose influence on European thought up to the Enlightenment, including Buffon, has recently been demonstrated by Chantal Grel. In Pliny, natura has two meanings. It is first of all the particular nature of each plant, stone, or animal. It is then the whole of the beings of the world, rerum natura, mother of all things, parens omnium rerum, which are linked together by connections of sympathy and antipathy in such a way that one cannot touch a part without affecting the whole. Nature is both the origin of techniques by mimesis, an aesthetic model, and a moral norm. Pliny condemns attacks on particular natures by the falsification of foodstuff, counterfeiting, the use of exotic and sophisticated products produced by cupiditas and avaritia. He condemns techniques that destroy general nature, such as mines that tear out the bowels of Mother Earth or the collapse of the mountains of Spain to clear gold veins. Man pollutes the air and the water. Book 13, verse 3. I quote, "We defile the rivers and the elements of nature, and we turn into a nuisance the very air by which we live." End of quote. Equally unnatural is the putting of animals in cages. I quote, "We began to constrict in a prison animals to whom nature has assigned the sky as their domain." End of quote. But nature takes its revenge. Book 39, verse 1. "We are surprised that the earth opens up and that it trembles as if the indignation of our sacred mother needed to be expressed." End of quote. But from the 16th century, humanist model was to come up against the development of capitalism. In the mining boom of the Erzgebirge, an obscure humanist, Paulus Nyavis, published a nice dialogue entitled Judicium Jovis, the Judgment of Jupiter, where all the gods of nature come to complain to him about the devastation caused by the miners in their domain. Against him, the metallurgist George Agricola, in his Bermanus, 1530, vigorously claimed the rights of industry. The new science which, as Edgar Zilsel has shown, is the intellectual superstructure of capitalism, abolished the norm of nature by considering the world as a simple play of forces. It suffices to quote Descartes in chapter 6 of the Discours on Method, advocating, I quote, "a practical philosophy by which, knowing the force and actions of fire, water, air, the stars, we could become masters and possessors of nature." End of quote. It was not until the end of the 19th century that the question was reopened. The dignity of man. We do not manipulate the beginning and end of life with impunity. According to legend, Titon, a Trojan prince, had asked and obtained immortality from Zeus, but forgot to ask for youth. Among alchemists, the elixir of long life has been part of their program since Roger Bacon, but they are careful not to claim immortality. Jean de Roquetaillade never fails to specify, and I quote, "within the age limits set by God," unquote. The same goes for research into the creation of the artificial man. The history of science has known several models of man. The man of clay, animated by divine breath in the Talmud, man as a microcosm of the elements in the Aristotelian Galenic tradition, the chemical man of Paracelsus, the man-machine of Descartes and La Métrie, the steam engine man of experimental physiology, the electric man of Galvani's experiments, the electronic and neural man. Each of these models corresponded to an attempt to remake man identically. The golem, the homunculus of the alchemists and Paracelsus, the automatons of Vaucanson, the electric man of Dr. Frankenstein, finally the robots and artificial intelligence. To take just one example, Paracelsus, in his De Generatione Rerum Animalium, describes the slow coction of human sperm in a hermetically sealed vessel, where it becomes like a normal child, but smaller. And he concludes, I quote, "We call such a being homunculus, and it must be educated like any other child with great application and care until he reaches the age of reason. This is the highest and greatest mystery of which God has permitted mortal and sinful man knowledge." End of quote. Without condemning the process, Paracelsus emphasizes its sacred character. Following him, theologians curiously will not condemn the in vitro generation itself, but the sin by which the sperm was collected. On the other hand, the legendary apparatus which surrounds the artificial creatures harbors another caveat. The golem, homunculus, and Frankenstein's monster eventually escape the control of their creator, become evil, and turn against him. Esoteric traditions thus connect with today's anxieties. I thank you for your attention.
This concludes this first session. May I remind you that the rest of the conference will take part in the National Learning here. I strongly urge you to walk in this beautiful, slightly dirty Athens. The next session is 30. Thank you.